Hey, my name is Nick Elston. I'm the founder of Forging People, and today we are bringing you the first in a series of balancing acts where we're talking about neurodiversity in divorce, the brainchild of Tamsin Caine. She doesn't know what she started yet. If you haven't met me before, this is going to be very much more informal and more relaxed than most sessions you kind of hear around these things. I like to do things in a very different way. That will feature as part of today's presentation as well. But I'll be joined by the amazing Tamsin Caine and Helen Taylor-Brimson, and they'll be introducing themselves very shortly. This session is being recorded until a point, and that point is after 45 minutes, quarter to the hour. We will be, no, not quarter to the hour, that'd be weird, quarter past the hour. We'll be switching off the recording, coming back for questions so that you have the confidentiality of not being recorded. We are Forging People. Our kind of mantra is igniting growth and forging success. We do that in two different ways. We provide unique learning and development programs, but also we use public speaking as a transformational tool through the Find Your Voice programs that we deliver here. We work in lots of different environments, not just in business and organizational, but tends to be where we work with people leaders and people development specialists. But we also work in the front line through the military, through the Ministry of Defence. We also work with the NHS and the fire service and the police force. We work in education, and we also work in the prison system. And actually, personally, I coach prisoners' public speaking skills as a transformational tool. Parents will get this, by the way. Prisons, far easier than schools. Trust me. Not only will get back up in prisons, I get armed back up in prisons. You don't get that in schools. Should get it in schools, but there we go. So lots of different environments, but still my crowning glory today is host and creator of KFC TV, 6'4", 24 stone, hosting a fried chicken TV station. I dreamed of that job. I trained all my life for that job. Maybe that'll come up at one of these sessions as well. Who knows? But my own experiences are from mental illness, namely obsessive compulsive disorder, at a very young age, then developed into something called generalized anxiety disorder, and going through life with high anxiety, obsessive compulsive behaviors. I went through my professional life with a really high state of burnout. I had a breakdown in 2012, and it was at that point I started to use speaking as a therapy. But I also realized very early on, I didn't want to be solution focused. I'm far too empathic for that. I just try and please everybody. But for me, the gap was the engagement. Why is it that when people need help, they don't reach out for help? And that's kind of led me to what I do today. So I'm not solution focused. I purely share my lived experience, insights, and experiences. But for ethical, moral, and insurance purposes, I make sure I surround myself with amazing people that actually do know what they're talking about from a solution focused perspective. And one of them is, from my stable of professionals and experts, is the wonderful Helen Taylor-Brimson. Woo! Helen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I'm Helen. I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist, and I also use NLP, but I also work with people with learning disabilities and autism. And my kind of previous history was working with children and young adults with challenging behaviour. So that came in a lot of different forms. So essentially what I do is I work with people to move them forward, to actually manage what they need to deal with in life. And that can come in a variety of different ways. And actually finding a way that's a more useful way of moving ourselves forward so we can live a life on a kind of calm, even keel as much as we can with the tools that we have, and creating new tools while we do that, so that we can manage certain situations, which is probably why sort of the kind of neurodiversity element is really useful, of understanding that, because the toolkit can sometimes look quite different from neurotypicals. So yeah, essentially that's me. I do lots of work with Nick, so thank you, Nick, for bringing me on, and thank you, Tamsin, for being the brainchild of this, because I think it's really important that we understand.
Yeah, they're two big, big subjects. And like I said, it is the brainchild of Tamsin. She started a whole new ball rolling for me. So I guess, Tamsin, do you want to introduce yourself, but also kind of why this is important to you as well, and kind of what angle you're coming at this from?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm a divorce specialist financial planner. So I work with clients going through one of the biggest transitional changes in their lives. And as that, I come across people who are in all sorts of different emotional states. one of the things that I'd noticed recently is that I'm more and more coming across people who have neurodiversity diagnoses, so ADHD, perhaps autism. And I'm very aware that I have absolutely no skills in my toolbox as to how to properly change my communications to deal with them in a way that reaches them properly. So I reached out to Nick, who I regularly reach out to when I don't know stuff, because he has an enormous network of wonderful people who know exactly what they're talking about. So we had a conversation that was like, I think that people working in family law and family justice probably need some help in dealing with people who are neurodiverse. Do you know anyone? And today was born.
There you go. And here we are. So welcome, everybody. So just to repeat, about 1:15, we're going to be kind of coming back to the room for any open questions you have. The recording will stop at that point, so you can ask questions in confidence. I guess let's kick off with the kind of the upfront, maybe Urban Dictionary definition. Helen, what is neurodiversity to you as a solution-focused therapist?
So neurodiversity, in its essence, is a different kind of wiring of the brain. So it comes in different forms, and it can affect us in different ways. And there's lots of different types of neurodiversity. So we tend to know the kind of ADHD and autism and dyslexia, but there's lots of other ones, like dyspraxia as well is another one, and dyscalculia. So there's lots of different types of neurodiversity, and essentially what it is it's the way that we process things. We process it differently, and that's down to the wiring of our brains. And so how we perceive and how we and how our world looks is slightly different from a kind of what we call a neurotypical person, and it varies, and it is but there are some traits and some things that we can do. I think I'll start off actually by saying, if you meet one person with autism, you've just met one person with autism. And that's really important to remember, that each and every one, and this goes across the board, each and every one with a neurodiversity isn't in a little box. And so they will have the same things, so that you can tick off. There will be differences. It is a scale. And so it's really important to remember that you're looking at an individual. It's just that there's a processing difference when they're approaching it. And probably the biggest challenge is there will be a lot of people that aren't diagnosed but respond in this way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Tamsin, I guess in everyday conversations around divorce, one of the most highly emotive kind of times of our lives that we can go through, especially, I guess, with the bolt-on impacts of things like children and property and assets. And I mean, how do you navigate those conversations anyway? Taking neurodiversity aside just for 1 second, how do you navigate those areas effectively?
I mean, that's a massive question, and listening to Helen describe neurodiversity as people being wired differently, I guess my experience feels like we're all wired differently anyway. So, yeah, trying to put somebody in any specific box feels like a big move. I suppose I am relatively empathic. I kind of feel everything. I take everything very, very deeply, hold on to things very deeply. It's about trying to not necessarily put yourself in the shoes of the person, but to try and draw them out as to what is the biggest issues for them, what's really playing on their minds, and try to help them through those situations. I mean, I'm not a therapist, I'm a financial planner. Then my priority is about the money, and if they need help from a therapist, I have a good range of people that I can pass them on to. But it is still having empathy towards their understanding or lack thereof of finances, because finances are blooming terrifying, let's be brutally honest. Even if we're the person who's looked after the money throughout the relationship, which isn't the case with a lot of my clients, it can still be be pretty scary to suddenly be on your own making all the decisions about the money, potentially about the children, about where you're going to live, about what your future in the next chapter is going to look like. So yeah, it's a big ask.
And that's why your insight is so important today, because actually, essentially, it's quite human, isn't it? Is that if you've got trust and rapport with somebody, if your client trusts you with their money, with their livelihood, they're going to trust you with everything. So, as you say, preparing yourself for those big conversations is crucial. I know from my experience with public speaking coaching that when I am coaching and delivering communication skills and public speaking skills to neurodiverse audiences, actually it's very different. The themes and the content is the same, so the process is the same, but how you deliver those and actually the level of engagement afterwards is very different as well. So it could be an increase of more questions or looking at things from a different perspective. Myself and Helen both donate time to a charity in Swindon called Inner Flame. And I guess one of our crowning glories to date is actually empowering somebody who is non-verbal to be able to stand up and deliver something. But it's just the way that you deliver it, and you kind of make people feel safe and supported, which essentially is what we're talking about here. So taking the professional element away is very much a human experience, isn't it? Is how we engage with another human being who just deals and thinks of things very differently. And I certainly have that element of thinking myself due to my obsessive compulsive tendencies, for sure, as Helen knows. She's known me for years. But I guess, Helen, when it comes to communicating, and I guess leaning to your work in schools with young adults, how does the communication need to differ when you're engaging with people who are neurodiverse?
I think one of the things that we need to kind of understand sort of part of the neurodiversity of why it can be, it won't process the same way. So if you're looking at things like ADHD, attention is something that's quite difficult. So if you're going to use lots of long words, give them a really, really big piece of, lots of forms to fill out, and you send them away with it, they're not going to do it, like, pretty much, because it's overwhelming. And that's not because they're being difficult. It's just that actually that's too overwhelming and it puts them into paralysis. It's the wiring in the brain. So there's lots of different things that you can, I mean, it's such a huge, like, neurodiversity is a huge topic. And one of the things that I would encourage you all to do is go and have a look and kind of find out a little bit about how those processes differ, because I'll be here all day explaining it. So, but understanding that actually, if you're looking at like ADHD, that it's about keeping it short and sweet. It's about giving deadlines so that it's manageable, bite-sized chunks, those kind of things. Keeping an eye on them so that those things are done, because sometimes it's out of sight, out of mind. So they walk away, we'll all have this conversation, and then it's forgotten. So it's about really managing in that way and recognizing that it's not because they're being, lazy or difficult or anything like that. It's just that that's not how their brain's going to process things, and that certain tasks will be deemed boring. It's all about the dopamine in it, and making sure that it's firing, dopamine's firing. They're looking, it's about looking for that kind of need to kind of understand. So in the ADHD world, they will be the people that are disorganized generally, and dyspraxia is the same as well, the organization way of it. Generally, if people know what they are, they'll let you know, and they might be quite aware of these things. But actually being able to have an open and honest conversation, what do they need from you that's going to really help them? Because remembering as well, with all these kind of, there'll be a lot of background of these processes that have lowered self-esteem. So you're normally working with people that are really anxious. We were anxious anyway when we're going through divorce, let's be honest. So if you can imagine the anxiety levels even bigger, because statistically ASD, ADHD people will have a higher level of anxiety anyway, and then you put divorce on top of that. So you can imagine that so everyone's behavior will be heightened. So actually it's about asking the right questions of, like, how can I help you? What will be more useful? understanding, particularly with autism, like understanding sensory things. Bombarding people with too much information can be overwhelming too. So making sure that the environment isn't noisy, or actually asking, again, is having those questions and communicating and slowing down, and not always assuming that people will get what you're saying. It's not about, because it's not about the level of intelligence or anything like that, but it's about understanding it in a different way. So sometimes people might just nod, but actually, have they really understood? So it's about finding different ways that might actually work for them, but asking that question of what's more useful. How is it easier for you to have things in bigger type, in kind of with symbols or whatever. There's lots of things that we can do that will really help, but also remembering certain things, like making sure you're on time, making sure that you communicate what you're doing, because if you change anything, change can be a real problem across the board in neurodiversity. So being really aware of that, if your appointments run over and you're going to be 5 minutes late, that could actually set somebody back and not actually be able to manage that situation very well. And again, this is all varying grades, but it's about getting to know. It's taking a little bit more time to get to know that person.
Absolutely. It's kind of like the vehicle, isn't it? I know the lectures that I deliver in with students who have ADHD, actually it becomes the vehicle of how they communicate. So they communicate very effectively, but in a very different way to I would. It's a different level of energy in that sense as well. So again, understanding that is a really important thing. I mean, we're talking about emotional support. So of course, I'm going to come to you first, Helen. When you are looking to support somebody, as Tamsin said, actually, if you are not a solution-focused person, or you're not a therapist or a practitioner, however, you're in a position of trying to support people generally, there can be that kind of inclination to try and kind of like bring people in, or to try and take responsibility, where actually that's not necessarily our role, is it? So how would you look at engaging with somebody who is neurodiverse by supporting their emotions? Because as you say, divorce is a highly emotional subject. As somebody who's been through that myself, very often we get caught in the emotion and the process can really slow down. So how do we start to deal with the emotional element of this, or emotional well-being for you as the person trying to support somebody, but also with the person in mind who's going through those challenges?
I think it's really, it's really important that that you have like signposting for a start. So actually get out there, start looking at what's around your community, so that you can help that person, but also understanding yourself as well, so that you're calm. Because another thing is having heightened sensories. If you're feeling really stressed by something, that's going to rub off. So actually making sure that you're in a place where you can manage behaviors too. But having those conversations, again, it's not so much about having to look after anyone. It's just about, okay, how do I need to deliver this to you? What will be more useful? Because you are speaking with adults, there's nothing.
Absolutely.
And that's really important to understand, is it's not actually that there's no level of intelligence. That's incredibly important, but it's the communication that isn't quite wired the same. So asking the right questions, again, making sure that you have sort of rooms that aren't overwhelming, there's not too much noise, that if you are running late, that you allow time for people to kind of settle, and that if it's not happening, if it's too much, then actually slowing it down. So one of the rules of thumb is that if somebody's feeling really, really overwhelmed, we use less words and space. And actually, if you find that you're butting up against something really challenging, is actually to kind of take a step back and allow it just to sit and allow the process, because pumping information to people, the processing isn't going to be the same processing as yours. So it's actually slowing that down, making sure that's been that's landing,
Yeah.
and then by asking the right questions and saying, so I've said this, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
How would that relate to that? So actually making sure that and the chances are they are. So, and remembering that people won't always be looking at you intently for that information, that actually movement, fidgeting, looking out the window, not actually giving any kind of body sort of mirroring, that won't necessarily happen. And that's okay. Just because somebody's tapping their pen doesn't mean they're not listening. Sometimes that can just be a regulatory thing. Things like with Tourette's, people with Tourette's may have tics. But just because they're ticking doesn't mean to say that they're not. It's not because somebody's not listening. It's just actually it's a different way of enabling them to process what you're saying, and concentrating on one task actually can be really difficult. So be prepared for it to not look how you'd expect. You can't, it's not sitting at a desk like you would at school and listening intently. It is that there will need to be movement, there will need to be breaks.
Speaking of which, actually, when I remember the first lecture I delivered was at Western College, not too far from me, and it is to a room full of students who have ADHD and autism. And I was delivering a session, and a lot of people had their heads like this, and I thought this is going to be the toughest gig ever. But actually, I was told by the lecturer, by the staff on site, actually, that's the way they kind of tune out. They can tune out, they can tune into you, they tune out lots of things. So it's a really interesting thing, and that was my first real step into understanding, as you say, it's not whether people are actually engaging or listening, is actually just about how they're choosing to communicate and engage with you. I guess if you flip that, if somebody is neurodiverse, but they want to communicate that neurodiversity to their Tamsin or their planner or their lawyer, what would you say it would be your advice to those people? What could they, how can they showcase how they want to be engaged with?
Well, that's
you say self-esteem and confidence can be a challenge to some. But how can you communicate that if actually that is you? If you're feeling you feel hesitant to share that with people.
I guess from the financial planner's point of view, that could be a standard question. You could put that as a standard question when you're engaging with clients across the board. It's like, is there any neurodiversity? There's nothing wrong in asking that question. What measures do you need in order for you to manage this kind of, this situation is highly emotive. What help will you need to manage this? So actually asking that question, that goes across the board for everyone, because we are dealing with people that are going to be heightened, going to be really anxious. The chances of response could be quite aggressive, or they might be quite emotional, or, whatever that is, because we're under threat. So actually asking questions and actually having that as one of your kind of qualifiers when people come to see you is like, what's going to be more useful for you? That's not singling anyone out. That's actually, actually encompassing everyone, making it inclusive, so that it enables people to stand up and go, actually this, and feel comfortable with saying that. It's about making everyone feel comfortable. And you don't have to have, ADHD or ASD to still struggle with these things. So it's about kind of, making it accessible for everyone. When you do that, then that opens up the world for everyone to be able to communicate more effectively.
Absolutely. And Tamsin, I know you're very keen to stress that purely this is your lived experience, and this is very much a learning curve for all three of us as well, so does everybody else here. But I guess when it comes to generally navigating legal discussions with high emotion, how do you personally deal with that? I mean, in terms of prioritizing your kind of own well-being, because as you say, you're an empathic person, you'll take on the vibe of people. But how do you navigate the discussions legally when there has to be a process to follow, but there could be anger or sadness or all these things thrown into the mix? How do you do that right now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what Helen's just said about asking people for how they would like to be communicated with, if they know that they take on information in a particular way. I was thinking about the way that we pass on information about the things that we do, and we try and make sure that we pick up on people who think numerically and provide them with the absolute granular detail, and the things who are picture people, who are big picture people, and we can show them graphs and so on, and those people who like to take on information by listening. And it feels very much like these are questions that we can ask. And I think the way in which I get through the conversations and the legal discussions and the emotion that's regularly on site. You know, I have a box of tissues on my desk here at home that reminds me that I'm regularly going to be dealing with people who are probably going to cry during the first time I ever meet them. And usually they're devastated by that. They're like, oh, I promised myself I was not going to cry today. And it's like, it's fine. You're one of however many people I'm going to see today who are probably going to be in tears. And it's okay. I've seen it before. You're not the first. You definitely won't be the last. And I think it's those emotions are acceptable. You're not in a space that you're the only one. And I think sometimes that we do feel a bit like we're the only one. And I think not feeling that is a useful thing to get across.
Again, that's a foundation stone of actually creating that safe space for your clients to have these open conversations with you. It's interesting how we do apologize for vulnerability, though, isn't it? Even in those really kind of challenging moments where everything's kind of going through the mill. I guess, Helen, this is a prime example for you as somebody that walks into your clinic, walks into your therapy room, and is at a certain point of maybe struggling to understand, because as you say, the vast majority in neurodiversity goes undiagnosed. And we see a lot of this online. We see through popular media, social media. So when people are trying to kind of find their way, how do you make them feel safe enough to engage with you on a very human level so that you can start to navigate that challenge with them, that discussion with them?
Yeah, I think with it is making sure that you are not going in with assumptions. I think is probably there. I always do that, know nothing. So a client walks through the door and I know nothing. And that's the best way to be, because then the client can actually build that information for you. So you're not got your preconceived ideas. It's about allowing people to recognize that they're not alone, because a lot of the time we do feel that we are alone, and particularly when we're feeling really anxious, we feel like the only people in the world that's happening, and our brain does lots of things to kind of encourage that. So it's about letting people that they're not alone, but actually this is their journey, and how do they want that to look? What do they need from you? Making sure that the space that you give them, particularly,
Did you see me for a while? Because I was on
sorry. So making sure that the space that you give them is quiet, is private, so that and isn't over, particularly for ASD and for dyspraxia and things. It's not overstimulating, so that actually the space that you give them is nice and calm.
Oh, is Helen frozen just for me or for everybody?
No, she's frozen for me too.
Actually, okay, no worries. So while she's coming back, so we're looking at tools for clarity and understanding. So I know from certainly from the Find Your Voice program of what I deliver, where we get people to share an adversity, a challenge, an experience, or something that's going on in their lives, very often by using things like visual aids or different levels of language. So, for example, the language and the tone and certainly the swearing. If I did that in a primary school, I'll be chucked out very quickly. If I do it on a construction site, it gains trust. So I think it's trying to bring in appropriate tools, whether that be visual aids or memory hooks. So, for example, after today's session, all of the attendees here will get links to the audio recording, the video recording, and the handout. And all the handout will have is memory hooks of the slides, because you will have your own experience of what this bit means to you. So, Helen, you're back just in time.
Oh yeah, I don't know when I went.
We're good, seamless, not a problem. We're looking, I guess, at kind of accessibility and making sure that we're inclusive in our communication. What kind of tools can we use for clarity and understanding? We were talking about visual aids and memory hooks, and you have things like subtitles and you have audio help. And what kind of things can we, I guess, tips to Tamsin, because Tamsin, that's why you're here, as you say. What can Tamsin do to make her in conversations and engagements more inclusive?
So again, it's like, you know, sometimes it depends on the person that's in front of you, but less words. So overworded documents. Sometimes it's easier to have the conversation than it is to actually just give a piece of paper. So again, it comes down to, and it's very similar to how people receive information anyway, is that some people prefer lots of detail, some people like the headlines, but keeping it less overwhelming. So keeping it shorter, sweeter, giving deadlines, so helping that structure. So interestingly, with ADHDers tend to not like structure, but actually need structure in order to progress, to do things. So actually giving structures, but being really mindful of that and being okay with it, because yes, it's frustrating if people aren't hitting the deadlines that you need, but actually if they, their functioning, their executive functioning is not allowing them to, then it's up to you to help manage that way through. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's the same with with autism, just making sure that there's not lots of different information being bombarded, because actually that can become overwhelming too. Sometimes audio's too much, so actually written might be easier. But actually, if you've got somebody that really struggles with communication and can't read, there's lots of like story, there's lots of photo symbols and things like that you can use, so more visual stuff. There's lots of stuff out there, but it's again understanding your client and actually going and researching a little bit about what autism and what ADHD is, what dyspraxia is, because again that can pose lots of challenges. Dyscalculia, so people that really struggle with maths. Mm-hmm. So actually understanding what dyscalculia is. So actually going out, having a look at all the different types of neurodiversity, so that you understand, get a little bit of an understanding. The more that you understand, the more that you can actually manage your work around what's going to be more useful. But it's also asking those questions, because you are dealing with adults and they have probably dealt with it all their life and will know techniques that work for them.
Yep.
But it's being mindful of that.
So I guess it's building up a kind of a playbook that you have that ready for any given situation, not as formal as a script, but like a kind of rough idea of how to kind of communicate with people in different settings, different environments with different responses. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So like if you're talking to somebody with ADHD in particular, don't go into loads and loads of detail. Give the headlines, like, right, it's this, and this. Okay, because there will be a lot of flitting around. So you will have to try and keep up because they'll go from one thing to another and go down another rabbit hole. So it's about kind of understanding that some people don't do everything linear and being okay with that, but keeping keeping a list for yourself of what's going on, because just because maybe it's a bit chaotic for you might not be chaotic for your client, and that's how they actually can process everything that's going on. So being mindful of that too, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And not being scared of it.
Yeah. I think this is the reason why Helen hangs around me so much, is because I'm not her guinea pig. Our road trips turn into therapy for absolute sure. And she's bought me a sign saying down the rabbit hole, because I do that. That's certainly one of my things to do. I do go off tangent. That's why I need to be the host and not the person answering the questions. But there we go. Anyway, so I guess the one thing I really wanted to address as part of this is around stress and anxiety. For me, in my experience, one of the most painful, drawn out processes, emotionally sapping kind of things that I've ever been through was actually my divorce. And in hindsight, I think for me, from my own personal experience, when I stuck to the cold processes, the actual going through the process of divorce, everything moved along. But I wasn't doing that. I was getting caught in the emotion. I was getting caught in the stress and the anxiety. And therefore, it made me kind of go into procrastination mode so that nothing would move on. I've hearing from lots of people I've spoken to since around this stuff, that can be a really common kind of response. People get caught in the emotion. So I guess, Helen, firstly, from you, from a solution-focused perspective, how can we manage stress and anxiety generally as we go through the process of divorce?
So as we know, well, as you know, Nick, because you hear this a lot, but as we know, when we're feeling more stressed and anxious, then our behavior is heightened. So we our not so great behavior is heightened. So we don't see, we start to lose that rational part of our brain. So we go from the kind of rational down to the primitive, where we just want to survive. So that's challenging in itself when you're speaking to somebody in survival mode. So it is really useful to keep it factual, to take the emotion, keep it less emotive. That this is the process that you need to do. What's the next step? Breaking it down, chunking it down into smaller steps. When we look at something like an end goal, it sometimes becomes really overwhelming, and particularly in divorce, there's so many moving parts. So actually, breaking it down and saying, right, well, we're going to tackle this bit now, okay, and then we tackle once we've done that, what's next? We can have, the initial kind of consultation will be the big overview, so you know where you want to go, but it's like, okay, how's this going to work? Chunking things down, making things into smaller bite-sized pieces, helps with the anxiety.
And as we sit here today, it's the tail end of Stress Awareness Month, or 2024. Hasn't been rebadged. But the theme has been little by little. And I think, again, that marginal gains, that kind of going through. But the one thing that we cannot control, of course, is other people. It's the other person that's going through that situation as well. But also, in Tamsin's point of view, that we're working with clients, and actually there's only a certain amount of control that Tamsin has over a situation. So how can Tamsin maintain her own well-being whilst going through the process of supporting somebody else through theirs?
Again, it's like taking that emotion. It's making sure that we're doing a bit of self-care, and we don't, it's not like about going off and pampering, but actually making sure that you give yourself time out. And that is, well, you can go and pamper, obviously, but it depends whether you like that or not. But it's more about making sure that we're taking these breaks. It seems to be a repeated message I keep saying at the moment. We've lost this ability to have a lunch break. When we're not working on tasks, our brain is working really hard. So when we're on that lunch break, actually, even though we're not doing what we'd consider work, because it's not the physical, mentally, our brain is absolutely processing all the things of the day. So taking short breaks are really important. Changing your location, so changing it up, making sure that we are moving ourselves from one place to another, particularly if we work at home, so that we can actually find some separation, allow our brain to do that. That is what we need to do. But find what works for you. It's not all going to work for you. So find what works for you. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. It's about you and what works for you, aside from alcohol and drugs, because then they're just self-medication. But things like, going out and walking and certain exercise or reading books, whatever that is, hobbies. Sorry, I could go on, but
that's really cool. It's good stuff. It's quality stuff. Anyone who's on the session right now or watching the recording, if you've ever seen me deliver stage stuff, you'll know that I'll talk about the time I walked into a reception of a law firm and they said, "I expected you to look like Joe Wicks." Yeah, I'm a fat Joe Wicks. I'll take that. That'd be called a lot worse. But that kind of the psychology behind that, in a sense, is that kind of, for me, self-deprecation, that kind of humor, the way that I do things, that if I'm here, I'm jeans and shirt, if I'm somewhere else, I'm jeans and shirt, and I cannot deliver authenticity if I'm not dressed authentically. And I try to be informal as a way to increase engagement. And it very much works. So you take a taboo subject, you take a strict subject, you take something which isn't spoken about enough, as these two subjects are. Neurodiversity, thankfully, it's on the rise of having conversations around this. But divorce still really isn't spoken about in the same kind of breath as well-being when it's actually a crucial thing. I try and take an informal approach actually to make it more human so that people actually feel engaged enough to then reach out for help. How do you both use humor? Because you both do humor and all informality in the ways that you work. Because the reason why we are all in each other's worlds is because on a human level that we just click. You have your very personable people, lovely people, both huggers. That's always a big thing in my book, but it's not an essential thing, but a big thing. So I guess, Tamsin, let's start with you. How do you use kind of personable traits and humanity in the way that you work?
Yeah, I think going to see a lawyer or going to see a financial planner, anyone with one of those scary professional titles, you always imagine you're going to go and see a middle-aged guy with a shiny suit on, a tie, big oak desk, massive leather chair, loads of books behind them because they're utter geniuses. I'm proper about breaking that mold straight away on day one. I don't want to be anything that anybody is going to expect when they say the words financial planner. So yeah, like you, I'm trying my absolute best, unless it's utterly essential, to not be suited and booted for any occasion. Because I want people to feel that they can open up to me. They need to be able to tell me about what they're really scared about where this is going for them. And yeah, we have tears, as I said, but there's lots of laughter, as you can imagine, in the sessions that I have with my clients. And it's about them wanting to open up, wanting to tell me everything that's going on for them, because I can't help them if I don't really understand what their approach to money is, what's really going on. And I think we've said already today, money is one of the last great taboos. And we're probably more happy to sit here and talk about our sex lives than we are to talk about what's in our bank balance. And so we've got a lot to break through when we want people to open up about money. So yeah, they've got to see someone who looks like them, not necessarily like has straggly blonde hair and 50 plus, but at least is approachable, and they feel they can have those open conversations with.
I love that. Thank you. Hels.
I think it's really important that we all, that everybody recognizes none of us are perfect. We have this really, really bizarre relationship with striving to be perfect, and we're not, but that's what makes us amazing. All our imperfections are what makes us unique. And so celebrating those, I mean, being able to celebrate the things that we're really rubbish at. And I have a very long list of those. And Nick, I know you know quite a few of them. So
you are phenomenal at kitchen dancing, though.
I can do kitchen dancing. But when it comes to like social media, I'm awful at it. So, there's lots of things that we're not good at, and being able to celebrate those things and laugh at ourselves. Because actually, when we do that, we take away that energy, we take the negative energy out of it. We actually go, do you know what, actually, that's okay that I'm not so good at that. What I need to do is either get somebody who is good to do it for me, and that's that kind of thing. When we start to break down those barriers that we're not perfect, that we've got to be these perfect human beings that act in a certain way, and we actually become the person that we are and love our faults and love our greatness, in equal measures, then it makes a different conversation. It makes a different world for us. It allows us to forgive ourselves for making mistakes, because actually mistakes is growth, and all those kind of things. So yeah.
Thank you. So parting wisdom, be coming to all of you, but for me, I guess it's to ask better questions. It's already been said today, there's no one way of conversing with anybody, communicating with anybody. Don't be afraid to ask better questions. I think there's a real fear that we're going to lose this. I think fueled by cancel culture and popular media and social media, we're terrified of asking people questions. If you've got a genuine need to be curious, to educate yourself, if you want to know how somebody wants to be engaged with, ask them the question with a genuine heart, and I guarantee you'll get the genuine answer back on how people want to be engaged with. Tamsin, parting wisdom from you?
That's a really beautiful thing, that, Nick. My parting wisdom I've stolen from Helen, because it's the biggest thing that I've learned today, and it's that less is more. So talking less, explaining less, and I think my default position is, when somebody's not really understanding, is to go on and on and on. And actually, if I just get out of my own head, shut up a bit and say less words, hopefully I should make more progress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Helen?
I guess, it goes with it, asking better questions from a place of curiosity. When we're curious about something, then those questions are different. But I think it's also, just go and find out. Go and have a look. Watch a few programs. Be curious. I think in anything that we have to deal with is actually that, just having a bit of curiosity around it. So the more knowledge we have, we don't need to be experts. That's not what we need to be, but actually understanding situations a bit more by just asking questions or finding different podcasts or whatever. There's so much information out there that can be really useful. So don't overload yourself, but equally don't shy away from it. Just be curious and ask the questions you need to ask, and just be you, and take lots of rest and breaks.
Or rate.
Always.
Tams and Hels, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Loved your input today. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insights and your tools and tips and all the great stuff. To everybody that's joined us live, a big thank you. We will be coming back to the room now for any questions, and the recording will be stopped. If you have any questions you want to ask confidentially to any of us, we can all be found at team@forgingpeople.com, and they will reach the right people. We're also on LinkedIn at Forging People, and also have a website which launches on the 1st of June in its new guise. So it's really been a pleasure to be here today and do this for you.